So now I'm going to present our second speaker, Elizabeth Fair, who is a PhD candidate in the History of Art program at UC Berkeley. She is interested in Chinese American material culture, memory and US history, cultural landscape, American art, and architecture history. She had many, many awards, but I'll just sort of highlight some of the more recent ones. She was a pre-doctoral fellow at the Smithsonian American Art Museum and National Museum of Asian Art. And she also was awarded the Myers Fellowship at the Huntington Library.
Okay, great. Hello. Thank you to the organizers, and thank you to William for having me. I'm very excited to follow you because we have a lot of points of convergence, and it's very exciting to talk about temples and not be the only one. My talk is entitled "The View from the Levee in the Sacramento Valley, River Valley, I guess, Chinese American Temple Objects in the Production of Lace." I want to acknowledge that my work builds on Chu-Mei Ho and Bennett Bronson's work, which we talked about, but also Paul Chase, David Lay, William Moss, Robert Ashburn, and Will Taubes. Through conversations I've had with many of these people, have all been very generous with me. And also note throughout, all the contemporary photos were taken by me unless otherwise noted, except for this slide, but we'll come back to this. To begin, this carving, which is roughly 3 feet high, resembles a miniature building on legs, one exquisitely carved all over and gilded with recognizable elements of roof tiles or tiled roof, layers of roof brackets, dragons crawling along the roof ridge. This is a sedan chair, portable shrine, a sacred palanquin, typically used to carry a deity statue for festival processions. As you can see here in this photo of an 1895 procession with a similar shrine object right here. This was one of 2 purchased by the Bakai Temple, a site of Chinese popular religion founded by migrants in the 19th century in Marysville, California, a town 40 miles north of Sacramento, in the Sacramento River Valley. It's here on view at the Bakai Temple Museum, which is curated by Heather Young and managed in part by her father, Tony Young. It's still, the temple is still managed by the Marysville Chinese American community. It had been ordered from, as we learned from William, a workshop in Guangzhou, the Shi or Thai workshop. The workshop name is prominently labeled up here. And it was donated by Yongsan Ji. And we know this because he also had it labeled right here. And he was likely a merchant from Marysville and likely from Guangzhou because it also says that here. Most temple objects were donated or were labeled with their donor and also with the date. So we also know that it was from 1900, according to the date, the 37th cycle year of the Guangxu reign. And from ledgers, we also know that he paid $800 for it, or to bring it over. The Palanquin Shrine had a long journey to Marysville. It crossed the Pacific from Guangzhou to Daifao, which is San Francisco, great port, where it would have passed through customs, hopefully without duty as a religious object, though a dragon in 1887 lost that battle, and then was put on a rail car or a steamboat for Sacramento, our Phao, second port, on the Sacramento River, and then up the tributary of the Feather River to Marysville, which was known as Sam Phao, or third port, so you can see. And Marysville is at the confluence of, as well, the junction with the Yuba River. And on this boat, it would have been accompanied by passengers and goods ordered by wholesale by merchants in the town of Marysville, white and Chinese and black as well. You can see here also I've labeled other temples that William talked about in his talk. So Weaverville is all the way up here, but Oroville is right here, also on the Feather River. And San Jose is sort of down here. The shrine usually sat in a temple, in the main temple room or in an adjoining room, displayed to be admired, but it really came into its own when it went out on procession, as discussed. It may have had its first public parade outing in early 1901 for the Bakhai Festival in early March in honor of Bakdai, the Marysville Temple's preeminent deity, processing in the main streets of the town so that the deity statue within could survey his territory and the building temple itself, traveling through town in its miniature form. Paying attention to the temples dotted throughout the Central River Valleys and Sierra Nevada mountain foothills, and to the mirroring journeys of both people and objects around them, shows us how temples were places where the relationships of Chinese people in California to their landscape become visible. They are also places through which such relationships were controlled or ordered by them through religious objects. Chinese Americans invested money, space, attention in these temples, but the sites remain understudied despite this rich and still extant archive of objects. So how do Chinese people use this architecture and these objects to respond to and shape landscape from the late 1850s to the kind of peak or the tail end of the late 1920s? Landscape in my usage means an intertwined place of kind of environmental and natural, spiritual, social, meaning intra-ethnic and inter-ethnic, political and economic relationships. I argue this is how the Chinese society here experienced landscape, and the temple and its objects help us see it that way. Religion was a deeply material and spatial practice and also formed social and economic ties, and the temples were deeply embedded in landscape, intertwined with it. And this capacious networked landscape is brought into the temple itself by its objects, and then these are then spilled forth, extending the logic of the temple with them out in these processions. So they're ordering spatially, socially, economically with religious objects and architecture. My title, The View from the Levee, emphasizes this viewpoint from the built environment of this river valley with significance for temples which are built right next to the levees. What do we see when we orient ourselves from this point? So here we have the temple, which is facing, I took this photo, I'm standing on the levee. This is the levee and the river right here, and the road going into town. And this is a historic image of the front of the temple. But looking from the levee allows us to see, I agree, California differently, as one organized by water and waterways, for instance, and as one consciously imbued with spirits. And also to see these temples not as isolated outposts away from big cities and rural towns, but as nodes in larger geographies traced at multiple scales, networked within the town, the state, as well as to their hometowns, to Guangzhou, and to a wider overseas Chinese diaspora, as we've already seen. Quick history of Marysville. It was located where the Yuba and Feather Rivers meet, east of Sacramento, on the way to the gold fields. It was a bustling town. It was the third largest city in California in taxable property in the mid-19th century. And after the drop-off in mining, it became an agricultural hub city in the center of the Sacramento Valley's vast land reclamation efforts, which the Chinese labored in. Chinatown had a prime location for trade, leading directly off the river. Let's see if this works. Yeah. By 1860, Chinese people were moving out of mining and already farm workers, market gardeners, fishermen, laundrymen with some small personal property. They were merchants, boarding house owners, cooks in private homes and hotels. There were 4 physicians in town, and there were even 86 women, according to an unreliable census. By 1870, the Chinese population of Marysville was roughly 30% of the total population of the city, like Virginia City, Montana, probably the peak percentage. And Chinese people were key to the economic success of Marysville, as we've heard in other presentations. The city really couldn't do without them. I've marked here, let's see, the temple, which is labeled as Joss House, and the dotted line here, all the way around, is the levee. And then I also included, this is a view of First Street today, so the one going across the top. The temple was seen as necessary early on when the community was established, and it grew as they had money to spend. A bit of background on temple worship. The religious practices have been grouped by scholars under a kind of designation of popular religion. It fused practices of ancestor veneration and Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, and the worship of local deities, often historical figures who had been elevated because of outstanding qualities. Deities and honored ancestors were important in daily life. They could be petitioned in times of need or when making decisions, often through the use of divination blocks. Gratitude was offered to them in times of prosperity. They were also the center of festival days and sources of holidays and entertainment. Temple objects were donated to propitiate and delight the deities, and other offerings of food or money were given, especially on important festival days. I took all these photos on the day of the Bakai Festival in 2023, so it's a bit of a special occasion, but some worship traditions today are similar. We have people waiting in line to light incense, which I also did. Food offerings, roast pig is very popular then and now, and people shaking out the sticks to get a number where you take it to the fortune slips, and they're historic fortune boards. This is a newer one. Or you use the yes/no blocks as they're doing on the left. And many of these people, by the way, are part of a new kind of Chinese diaspora in the valley. I think many of them are from Vietnam or originally. Though a temple had existed since the 1850s, current space was purchased in 1869. An existing property, the brick former city baths were renovated. The Chinese community began to use the building as a temple in 1869, when it was still owned by white attorneys, but Chao Yo and Yi Wa Cheng purchased the parcel in 1880, then transferring the title to the trustees of the Bakai Church, who were Lung Xing, Wang Ting-oi, Chao Yo, and Ji Wa Cheng. It's significant in a time when it was difficult for Asian people to buy property, as we've heard, that they expended effort and capital to do so for the temple. The site was extensively renovated. The renovation work was carried out by a local building firm who actually took all their direction from the Chinese property owners. So we can see here it was from plans drawn by Chinese draftsmen. The contract was reportedly for $2,200, though the building contractor hinted to the newspaper it would be $5,000 with furnishings, which was a tremendous amount of money when average wages for Chinese workers were between $20 and $40 a month. The temple is a double gable M shape with a recess in the ceiling where they join with additional kind of perpendicular units for side rooms. The M shape is a kind of particularity of architecture in Guangdong often. And then we see the front gate with and the front entrance, which uses calligraphy as a focal point around the entry. And we'll also see the bright color and the rich decorations on the front and the roof and the inside. The interior is Douglas fir, so they're also using the material and building techniques around them, guided by American building traditions and using kind of the availability of cheap lumber. As important as this building is, the objects inside, I argue, are just as important, shaping space, articulating relationships, joining inside and outside. Indeed, the almost equal amount spent on furnishings might tell us that the temple objects mattered tremendously. For one thing, the architecture functions like a shell. The objects within work together with and against the exterior architecture to articulate the space within, like an alternative architecture nestled inside, in the process conjuring a more splendid imaginary than the painted boards. And you can see a version of this here, I think. Objects also brought relationships to landscape inside, helping to bring about its function as a node here. The landscape of California was alive with natural power. The life or energy force of Qi permeated surroundings, flowed through living beings, linked all together. As Catherine Jin Lum has put it, the landscape vibrated with energy and spirits, both good and ill, end quote, and was thus always imbued with power that needed to be managed, and the temple and its objects had a real function here. Water had a particularly strong pull for Chinese migrants in California. This began with their voyage across the ocean in invocations of Tianhe. It didn't really begin there, I guess. They were also watery relationships before. Tianhe, but a goddess of the ocean, protector of travelers, sailors, and fishermen. So very popular in coastal regions in southeastern China and very popular in California temples. The name of Bakai means north stream, so the position of the temple itself facing the water was extremely important. These are current images from Google Maps, and we're on the highway into town, which was a wagon toll bridge and then the railroad. And so the Yuba River is right here. This is the levee, and the temple should be right here, I think. Another view, standing on the levee looking down to the entrance and the dotted line, which we've seen before. Though you can see the levee is higher than the temple now. In 1872, the levee was only 2 feet high, and until 1911, apparently much lower, so they would have had a less obstructed relationship with the river. Its position facing the water has to do with a certain school of feng shui. It's also key for economic positioning with trade, bringing people and goods on the river to a nearby landing, but also, I mean, it's key for safety because this area is extremely prone to devastating floods. So water was vital for agriculture, where many in Marysville made their living. As you know, California is often subject to droughts, but Marysville was also regularly flooded in the 19th century, and this is the nearby town of Oroville. The temple's patron deity, Bokdai, was associated with water as well as military protection, and was specifically asked for his advice and protection in floods. The temple worked in concert with other measures, namely the levees. The Chinese people labored to build the levees in Marysville and adjacent areas and recognized their importance. In 1874, they sold the temple property in a different area of the city to the city council in order for a larger levee to go through. Governance of landscape was brought inside by the objects, housed inside, reinforced. We have here the actual statues simply of Tin Ho and Bokdai, so their physical presences. Deities and spirits were expected to have or develop a strong relationship to place. Significantly, the deity statues in California were sometimes made from local clay. Local clay may have been a way of cementing the relationship between the god and his territory. Through the sculpting of the statue, gods were induced to settle down and build reciprocal bonds with the villagers of a certain area. But also inside there are many depictions of dragons who are associated with control of water and a watery landscape. We have here the dragon kings churning through waves in a scene depicted at this bottom of the Choi Moon here, which hangs in front of a dragon wreathed in mist painted on the back of the altar. There's also the spectacular dragon head itself for parades that was housed in temple complex. Social and economic relationships articulated through landscape were also led in by objects. How the objects were made is one pointer. Some objects were made in San Francisco or by local Chinese artisans or artists, like the frescoes under the eaves here, but most of the fine ones were imported, as we've heard. I think, again, it's likely that the diaspora was a known market for workshops, objects made for them in mind. I can go through this quickly, but this board in Oroville from 1874, you can see was customized later, so the block was filled in with the donor, well, the date and the donor, so it's probably sent away from a kind of set series of objects, which suggests a larger market, and the objects connect the temple assemblage to the Guangzhou workshop, but also as members of this known diasporic market. So the temple surfaces these diasporic relationships, but also shows us regional networks. The objects inside map form these relationships with more local social preoccupations. Within the Chinese community, the temple was a seat of authority where a council of businessmen met, often to arbitrate the disputes, take responsibility, control of the behavior of the Chinese community. And as we've seen so far, almost every object, including these, almost every object was already inscribed with words, with the donor name and the date, if not the maker as well. So I'll actually go back to this slide because it's better. Inscription forms the second skin of the interior, and these prayer boards and couplets and hangings and object donations begin to map for us, but also for them, who is and who isn't part of the community. This is to some extent a function of how religion works. It's tied to village, family, lineage, but the sheer number of donations, so this is roughly 500 names listed on this board as contributing to the renovation and expansion of the temple in 1880, indicate that a large percentage of the population contributed, and has regional contributions from San Francisco, Sacramento, Oakland. It also includes women, so they're put at the bottom in a separate section, but they could donate in their own right. And it's likely some of them, or perhaps all of them, are sex workers because of the kind of entertainment names used. Prominent donations secured one's reputation in town through contribution to the town's good fortune and entertainment, and one's favorable relationship with the gods. Everyone could see what you gave, how much, and temple donations traced and networked this community and encouraged participation in what was naturally an economic network. But also again connects the diaspora. Inscription could remind them of how they existed in multiple streams of time at once. So coming back to dating, most of these objects note dates with the emperor's reign name, which was a standard way of marking time, dynastic time, and place the reader within that realm in the sense of continuity. So that's, this is in Weaverville using a reign name on this board, but as Hode Bronson have pointed out, they also, in Weaverville has the Tianyuan system, which is, if anything, more diasporic. It's a revolutionary system tied, for instance, to the Qigong Tong, which was sworn to overthrow the Manchu Qing, and they were extremely popular in the diaspora, and particularly in these rural areas. These differently scaled landscapes came in through objects, but the objects also went out to influence the landscape, particularly through rites and processions, which were then a further reinscribing of landscape and territory under the protection of the gods and the worldview of Chinese residents, and a renewal of social and economic ties. So processions and festival activities were a key part of shaping space, physically moving through the town, through its main streets, beyond Chinatown, and bringing an extended area under the purview of the Chinese residents. And the influence of their deities. So the objects actually leave the temple, you carry forth the shrine and the deity, extend it, turning the temple inside out. We can see the representative association between the temple and the traveling shrine quite clearly here. This is an exquisite example from the neighboring town of Oroville. And they have the miniature Choi Moon, which you can almost see here, up here, and then the placards which you carry in the parade in their stands at the entrance, which is also here, like the Marysville entrance here. Processions confirmed territory and relationships for the deities as they were physically carried through the landscape. The dragon procession extended the spirit's control of the weather to the town and the levee, just enough rain, not too much. It was also about social and economic ties intertwined. The parade, in one scholar's words, summarizes their relationships with one another. It traces the town, it draws Chinese residents from every block. They could also remind the community of individuals and organizations of status. So the Qigong Tong would march, merchants and their well-dressed wives. I couldn't resist, but the wives rode horses. So this was a parade in New York, but we know this happened in Marysville as well. Festivals were also economic engines. The temple management could to some extent direct as patrons. But people came from all over the city, from miles around, other Chinatowns, all over the valley and the Bay Area to participate, to buy offerings and food, to gamble, to watch opera. And these annual festivals brought all types of Chinese people together. As one newspaper put it, the merchant, the dude, the farmer, the highbinder, and native son, as one community, reinforcing their bonds, propitiating the gods and spirits, and entertaining both human and divine. I'm not going to talk about this at length. This is my last slide, but I'll end with this image. The parade was also about civic and political engagement with white neighbors and a white power structure, something more than coexistence, but vital to survival in an era of often violent Chinese exclusion in directly neighboring towns. This is the Sacred Pelican we started with, participating in a 1901 4th of July parade in Marysville, so engaging with the town's civic life as far as they're allowed, contributing the rhetoric of a Pearl River Delta ritual procession to the California town celebrations, showing off native-born Americans. So there are children dressed up in this cart, and these children were important to both white and Chinese society, and representing a need for patronage protection from Marysville's political establishment. Mabel Chan, who grew up in Marysville in the 1910s, described the parades as oral history in an oral history as her political activity. So looking from the levee, I argue, offers a way of understanding how Chinese people responded to and shaped landscape at multiple scales through religious objects to bring a California River area within their spiritual, social, economic, and diasporic world and worldviews. Thank you.